Wednesday, March 17th, 2021. Just after 5 p.m., Vancouver, Canada. 26-year-old Jamie Coots is heading home after a quick trip to the drugstore.
I'm walking directly downtown, probably the nicest part of Vancouver. About halfway home, I could feel somebody walking really close behind me. When I was looking at my phone, I can kind of feel that they're just stopped there.
Jamie feels uneasy, so she looks behind her to try and get a better look at the person.
He's maybe 155 pounds. He's a small guy. I would say 5'7", 5'8", a little bit darker skin, darker hair, dark eyes.
Besides his eyes, Jamie can't see the man's face. It's completely hidden by his sweatshirt hood and mask.
This is very typical of someone who has ill intent. They want to be incognito so that all of their really poignant features aren't highlighted, especially their face.
I put my phone away and looked up and said, "You're walking too close to me." And the man, he didn't say anything to me, so I was like, okay, that's weird.
The stranger is clearly following Jamie. But why?
It's possible that this stalker was trying to figure out where she lives, where she works, who she was meeting up with, trying to gain as much information about her as possible.
I think he was waiting for a reaction from me, to try calling 911, to running, to screaming.
If Jamie calls 911, will the man hear and get angry? Instead, she decides to turn on her phone's camera.
My only thought was, you can't go home. And so that's why my body told me to record what's happening. I truly thought that that would kind of deter him a little bit. I could call the police, but that couple of seconds in between stopping the recording and trying to make the phone call, he could have approached me. And that would be the access point to come grab me.
When you're in a situation like this, you're thinking, I'm either going to survive or I'm not. And so she's thinking, what can I use? What are my weapons? For someone who's a civilian who doesn't carry around weapons, your phone can be quite powerful because of that camera. So this was really quick thinking on her part. So at least she has this guy on film. If something happens to her.
I took my phone and I held it like this, up as high as I could, so him and everybody else could see that I was recording. That way I could have a plain view of what's in front of me and how far he is behind me.
But whoever this man is, and whatever he wants, the camera doesn't stop him.
He did not care at all. He looked the camera straight. He was not scared of being filmed. He has no intention of giving up. He's walking at an extremely quick pace, and you can see him kind of double step. I walked through a red light at one point, just as the light's changing, and he keep up with me. I'm definitely scared. It's the first nice day, but I'm still in a big winter jacket, and I'm walking on the verge of running. So I'm covered in sweat. My t-shirt was soaking wet. You can see him in multiple parts of the video wiping his face like this, trying to keep up with me. I continue to walk, and what should have been a 10-minute walk quickly turned into about 30 minutes. There's absolutely no other space to wonder what's going to happen next, because I'm absolutely consumed with what my next move is going to be. I'm shaking. My adrenaline's definitely at its peak.
Jamie needs to outrun or outwit the man who is following her as fast as she can.
My worst fear is sex trafficking or abduction. In Vancouver, we do have a big sex trafficking issue. We are one of the main ports, and there's been a huge amount of women going missing in the area. All I wanted more than anything was to go home, but I didn't want him to know anywhere close to where I lived. I decide that it's in my best interest to, one, continue reporting, and two, get somewhere that's highly populated. That's when it popped into my head, you know what, I'm gonna go to the skate park. There's a lot of people there. And if this man decided to do anything, there would be so much eyes. I went right to the absolute center of the skate park, thinking that he wasn't gonna follow me in. and he continued to follow.
Nothing is stopping this man, and Jamie is panicked.
I'm just trying to look for the biggest group of people and hope to get help.
Hey, do you mind if I sit with you guys? This guy's literally been following me in circles for like 40 minutes, and I've been recording it. And he's literally just standing behind me, and I don't know his issue.
Yeah, that's cool. You just pull up a seat.
But even when Jamie sits down, the stalker doesn't go away.
In the video, you can see he's either holding something or he's got fists in his jacket pockets because his hands are in there, and he's trying to pull his fists out, but having kind of a hard time.
Does this man have a weapon? What does he want?
He was probably sizing up the situation to see if he could ultimately take her or attack her. This is terrifying. Had she not gone to a group of people, maybe we would not have seen her again.
The man lingers for a few minutes, but as more and more skaters turn to watch him, he finally leaves.
You can see him start to walk away, and then one of the girls who was skateboarding there tried to approach him, but he continued to walk away.
Now, all Jamie wants to do is get home. But she's paralyzed with fear.
I saw the direction that he walked off in, and when I was ready, I made the mission home, but I had eyes all around me the entire time. I called the police and I let them know what happened. I give them a description of the man and screenshot a couple images from the video I had taken. Later that evening, I decided it's probably kind of important if I post this to social media. My initial thought was, if I post this, maybe somebody would be like, oh, I've seen that guy.
To Jamie's shock, she isn't the only one who's had interactions with this stalker.
I had a huge amount of people come forward saying that they've had similar situations in the past. And then about 4 women say that they were stalked very recently by somebody who appeared to look like the same man.
This is very disturbing because when someone is a serial stalker, that means that they're thinking about what they're going to do to their victims. And that means that it doesn't stop at one person.
One of the women, Nani Gonzalez, is actually from within Jamie's own circle of friends.
10 seconds into the video, I was just like, oh my God, this was the same person that had recently followed me.
Fortunately, Gonzalez says she was able to avoid the man and lost him before she reached her home.
By the next morning, I had hundreds of messages asking me to go public.
Social media sleuths are eager to help Jamie figure out who the man is.
People wanted to figure out exactly who he was, messaging me all kinds of crazy things that I didn't even notice to look out for. Hey, did you notice there was a car with the back window unrolled?
They also point out something Jamie never saw. It looks like the stalker had something in his hand.
He was grabbing something from his pocket and putting it into his satchel, which looked like a switchblade or maybe a box cutter. And you see him at one point get caught off guard by another girl that he keeps kind of looking back at. And I was told by many people that she kind of had a similar look to me. And so I wonder if there's a specific type of woman that maybe he tries to go for. It wasn't until I had posted it to social media that I realized, okay, my intuition was right on knowing that this man, he's done it before, he's gonna do it again.
Just a few days after Jamie posts her video, the Vancouver police apprehend a suspect who they believe is connected to the disturbing stalking incidents. He is charged with criminal harassment for Jamie's incident.
We're very pleased that we were able to arrest the right person in this case.
Social media is amazing these days. You can put something on there and really reach a lot of people.
The ordeal has left Jamie shaken and constantly on alert.
I think about it all the time. You really don't expect what happened to happen in broad daylight. I think that your gut is the most important thing in the whole world. From my experience, I've learned that if something doesn't feel right, to trust it.
And she hopes talking about her experience
Also trying to process what had just happened.
will help honor those who weren't as fortunate as she was.
I was super lucky. There's a lot of women going missing I don't want those people to be forgotten. And so I use this as an opportunity to speak out for them.
In Missouri, a brave young boy is also speaking out after a frightening attack. Friday, July 3rd, 2020. Downtown Cape Girardeau, Missouri, 11:40 p.m. A youth hip-hop group shows off their moves.
We were performing downtown, which is a few blocks over from our studio. It was a very usual thing for us to do on the weekends, just to bring in some extra money for the kiddos.
12-year-old Ethan Hagler, known in the group as E-Man, is one of the students participating in the street performance.
It's not abnormal for Ethan to be out with his friends on a non-school night past 10. It was 4th of July weekend. Ethan went off with his dance friends, just go hang out and dance and be in the downtown atmosphere.
There's a lot of people there. They would walk by and like see us dancing, but we would make sure they don't like stay too close to us.
We're DJing, we're having fun, we're talking to people, and with all the positive energy flowing, I decided to turn on my Facebook Live to show everyone. That's what we do.
We just let it record, and we just start dancing, we start DJing.
I'd seen several cars that were just circling around the block, which was normal.
But within 10 minutes, their night takes a sudden and terrifying turn.
This kid is dancing, and he's having a good time, and this car abruptly stops, and this man gets out of the car.
And he starts to dance along with us. He gets close, and I see him rear back, and
with no warning, the man attacks Ethan.
He just sucker punches this kid out of nowhere.
Ethan's attacker never says a word. He just punches the 12-year-old brutally in the face, then bolts.
I ran after the guy. I tried to catch him, and I saw two other people in the car.
This instructor is in a really precarious situation. He's there to protect these minors.
I'm thinking, do they have guns? I have kids with me. Should I pursue this guy?
Everyone is in shock and in terror.
I remember getting hit. I fell over, and then I blacked out. And then I woke up, and I was crowded with people around me. I was very confused, I was very shocked. And I was like, what just happened? And I didn't know what to do. Blood was going all over the place. Michael immediately called my mom. She ran straight for me. She kept on saying that she was sorry, because she wasn't there.
The bouncers at the bar across the street, I kind of waved at them, come here, come here, come here, and they're right on it. They brought out ice, they brought out water to help wash off the blood, and made sure that E-Man was okay. They also called 911 for us.
That's when Ethan sees the video of what just happened.
Michael, he gave me the phone and showed me what happened. When I saw me fall, I was like, dang. The cop asked me some questions, and then my mom took me straight to the closest hospital.
They immediately went and did an MRI.
The doctors told me that I had a seriously bad concussion.
In the ER, Ethan's mom sees the video for the first time.
I was instantly so angry that I felt hot. We watched it over and over and over. And he said, I just want to understand why this happened.
Why did I get hit?
By Sunday, 2 days after the attack, hundreds of Facebook users have shared Michael Curry's video. It's viewed more than 970,000 times.
The grown man is attacking a boy from behind. That's cause for outrage and anger. Is this a gang attack, an initiation of some sort? There's something that seems premeditated about this.
A family wants your help identifying this man in the photo behind me.
I did not expect this video to become viral like it did.
It spread like wildfire.
It was shared, it was commented on, and people contacted the police.
Within just 1 day, the viral video gives police a critical tip: the name of the suspect.
Breaking at 5, this 27-year-old Cape Girardeau man.
The video, it was on the news in Paducah, in Cape County, in St. Louis County, CNN, TMZ, the New York Times. It was everywhere. It was just comment, comment, comment. This is Cedric Moore. This is Cedric Moore. This is Cedric Moore.
The police definitely knew who he was because his other crimes that he's committed.
He was on probation currently for a domestic assault where he beat up his girlfriend.
So many tips come into the police, it makes it easy for them to find Cedric Moore Jr.
They contacted the police about his whereabouts and about his past. Eventually, he had nowhere left to hide. He turned himself in within a week.
No one else who was in the car is ever identified. But Moore's bond is set at $50,000, cash only.
I felt so relieved. I cried. I was so grateful.
I'm glad it was recorded and his face was seen.
Without the camera rolling that night, I don't think the suspect would have been caught.
10 months later, Ethan faces his attacker in court as he is charged with second-degree assault. Moore refuses to say Ethan's name out loud and offers no explanation for his actions.
I asked Ethan 3 or 4 times, I said, how are you handling this so well? He looked me in the eye and he said, he can't hurt me anymore. The deal that was offered was that we would drop the child endangerment in exchange for him pleading to the assault charge. So his probation has been revoked and he has to do the 4 years for that prior assault. And then he got 7 years for the assault on my son. When he is released,
I'm gonna be around 21 maybe.
There will be a restraining order that Mr. Moore can never ever come anywhere near Ethan ever again without immediately going right back to jail.
I just really hope the lesson that he learns is powerful enough to make him change paths to a more positive life.
Ethan still isn't fully recovered.
I still get multiple headaches and it's hard for me to sleep. School is hard for me as well.
He sees a therapist every week. He was diagnosed with PTSD. His vision has probably been permanently damaged.
But he is determined never to allow that night to crush his dreams, and now performs on a national level.
Ethan dances 5 nights a week, competes on the weekends, travels all over.
We focus on the arts, and with art comes confidence. When you can show a kid that they are bigger than they think they are, you're showing them a path to being a positive adult. He's a really big role model for a lot of kids around here.
If you want to follow your dreams, then keep on going. Don't stop and don't let anyone bring you down.
It's a shocking crime that makes headlines.
Disturbing weekend attack on a local Uber driver.
He was scratched, strangled, and bitten by his passenger.
And we want to warn you, it's not easy to watch.
It all starts on April 15th, 2021 in Tampa, Florida. Michael Hassey is a welder by trade. To make extra cash on the side, he drives for a popular rideshare company.
I have a full-time job that works me like 55 hours a week, and it was a pretty easy way to make some extra cash.
But Michael knows the job has potential downsides.
Dealing with people that were intoxicated, and people throwing up in my car and being a little rowdy or loud. But yeah, I was driving for about 6 or 7 months. I did close to 500 trips and I never had an issue.
But on this April afternoon, everything changes.
It was a Saturday, so I figured I might as well drive a little bit. Your phone will just ding and say that you have a request from someone. I got the notification around like 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
At the pickup location, Michael finds 2 women, a mother and her daughter.
Her daughter, who was the one who called, and she introduced me to her mom and asked me if I could please get her home safe. I wasn't thinking anything of it. I picked her up from a really nice upscale bar in South Tampa, and she looked like my grandma, like completely normal, just the most average person you've ever seen in your entire life. And she ended up passing out in the back seat, kind of like dozing off. I was driving her for about 20 minutes before she woke up.
That's when Michael realizes something isn't right.
She just kind of like was making weird noises, like grunting sounds, and I asked her, "Are you okay?"
Then something terrifying happens.
She put her hands on me while I was driving the car. This lady is both of her arms wrapped around my neck, choking me out.
She violently attacks her driver, refusing to let go of him.
Michael is stunned and instinctively manages to hit record on his cell phone, which is mounted on his dashboard. He can't understand why this woman is suddenly attacking him.
I've never had someone wake up and just like be in a completely different state of mind. I told her, "Please take your hands off me, I'm gonna call your daughter." And as soon as I said the words, "I'm gonna call your daughter," it was like a switch flip. I could see, I'll never forget the face she made at me through my rearview mirror. Eyes just like solid black, and punched me in the side of the face.
He's in a no-win situation. He took a selfie video because he was afraid that for whatever reason she calls the police, that he would get in trouble.
And it seems this woman is not letting up.
She actually reached over my shoulders and grabbed my forearms while I was driving 50, 60 miles an hour and tried to get me to wreck multiple times. I was having to honk at other cars to get out of the way. All of this is going on while this lady has both of her arms wrapped around my neck. And at this point, I'm just trying to concentrate on driving the car and not wrecking into anyone.
Just think about that for a moment. You're driving 60 miles an hour and she's choking him for a significant amount of time. She's obviously concerned what's going to happen. He doesn't want to pass out while driving, which is even worse.
I had no option to stop the car. I'm in the middle of a major highway.
As the ride continues, Michael can only hope that he makes it to his destination safely. But this woman is about to take her actions to another level.
Stop fighting him!
Stop.
Michael is in a complete panic. He's in danger, and so is everyone else on the road.
A driver of a motor vehicle being attacked from behind, being rendered incapable of driving and steering, turns that vehicle into a possible missile.
Somehow, he manages to get off at an exit and pull into a parking lot.
There was a pizza place right next to where I stopped. I was screaming and honking the horn for help.
Hearing the commotion, restaurant staff soon circle his car.
I just don't want to put my hands on her.
Michael's immediate concern is they don't mistake him for the bad guy.
I wanted everyone to know that I was the victim of this. I know if I would have defended myself and the cops would have pulled up and I'm hitting her in the face or something like that, I don't see myself just, walking away from that.
One person begins filming with their phone, while another calls the cops.
Before I knew it, there were like 10 people outside of the court.
Some people reach through the open window and try to pull the woman off Michael. But his attacker is relentless.
Even when I finally got the car pulled over safely and there was an audience of people watching her, it did not faze her.
Please stop. Please stop.
She continued and even started to amp it up and get more violent.
And then she does something that shocks everyone.
She bit me in the neck.
No, please stop. Stop.
She sinks her teeth a la Mike Tyson into the back of his neck and takes out a $50 sized chunk out of his neck.
She bites him, draws blood.
Stop fighting him!
Stop.
I was just so shocked by what was going on. I really didn't know what to do at all. I was just pretty much getting suffocated for 6 minutes before that, trying to prevent me and her from both getting killed in a car accident. It felt like I had a grown man's arms around my neck. I couldn't pry her arms off.
It's fine.
She's got her entire body weight up against my neck in the seat.
Michael is desperate to get away from the violent woman.
After she bit me, I freed myself up and got out of the car.
He even manages to grab the car keys before the woman tries to drive off, but he is far from okay.
I stood up for a second and I ended up having to sit down to catch my breath because I was literally winded. Having hands around my neck for that long, it almost felt like they were still around my neck.
Stunned by the crazed woman's behavior, everyone jumps in to help.
All the bystanders that were watching surrounded my car and held my doors shut so she couldn't open any of the doors.
We need the cops here now.
At one point, she actually climbs into the front seat and it looked like she was trying to get out through the window.
Don't.
They closed all the doors and tried to keep her inside.
Finally, help arrives.
It took the authorities about 10 minutes to get there. For me, it felt like a lifetime. They took her out of my car and they put her right on the ground and put her in handcuffs. She was giving the cops a really hard time, and in front of the police officers, she threatened to kill me. Then in the back of one of the police cars, she threw up.
The woman is identified as 55-year-old Michelle Stillwell.
She was charged with aggravated battery, which is a felony, and tampering with a witness. So she received 2 felony charges out of this. She could do years in prison.
After the attack, Michael needs medical attention.
I went to the emergency room and got a tetanus shot and a rabies shot. On my discharge paperwork, it said assault victim and human bite. I'm lucky that I had the seat in between me and her because it could have been worse.
And he never gets any explanation for why she targeted him.
Why? I'd love to know what was going on 2 hours before she did that to me.
I have to believe it's extreme intoxication or extreme drug use of some sort. I'm not going to speculate as to specifically why, but gosh, you would seem to think that extreme levels of intoxication would be what fueled this.
The video of the wild ordeal goes viral.
There is new video tonight of a disturbing weekend attack on a local Uber driver.
Yeah, the driver says he was scratched, strangled, and bitten by his passenger.
Exclusive video from a witness asking to remain anonymous shows the Uber driver with his hands up and can be heard saying multiple times, "I can't breathe."
I woke up one day and it was on the news. It's hard for me to watch, to be honest with you.
Michael says he really doesn't like to think about that day anymore. But along with his lawyer, he is using the video to push for more protection for rideshare drivers.
I'm hoping that the rideshare services take an increased safety measure to protect the people driving and the passengers, because I feel like neither party is safe.
And Michael says from now on, he's sticking to his day job.
No, I will never work for a rideshare company ever again. It really was traumatizing.
In California, another raging customer has a whole restaurant in fear.
Hey, wait, what the Well, the wings are supposed to be fiery, not the customers.
Witnesses say the angry confrontation started after a mix-up with the man's order.
Saturday, March 13th, 2021, around 1:45 p.m., Antelope, California. Theron Trujillo, his wife Flor, their 2 kids, and a friend are picking up food from a local restaurant when they notice something odd.
Pulled up to the restaurant, and then we see the other car pull up, and he got out, and he just slammed the door.
The guy seemed very agitated, seemed very angry. He pulled up really quick, and he pretty much ran into the store.
And we were just oh, something's gonna happen.
I'm in a rush. I got my kids at my house. I'm in a rush.
Yeah, when you see someone pacing, you know someone's upset. And that's a really good red flag to not get in that person's path.
While his family waits in the car, Theron cautiously steps into the restaurant.
All I wanted was some ranch.
When my husband went into the restaurant, he's like, that's not gonna stop me. I still want my ranch. I'm just gonna go get my ranch.
Just in case, he decides to record what happens.
I pull out my phone, I started recording.
Give me my money back, please. Thank you.
But when Theron walks in, he only finds what appears to be a frustrated customer.
Okay, well, I understand that. You don't have to call your manager when you serve me my food. I would just like a refund. Well, you just told us that we can replace the chicken. I don't want this order replaced, bro.
It's obvious that the customer has been trying to get his money back for some time and is now at the end of his rope.
I don't want it. I don't like the customer service I got. I just want my money back. That's it.
You know, there's something called hangry, but this is hangry to the next level.
I want my money back. I don't want the food, bro.
The employee patiently tries to explain that they don't offer refunds for online orders.
Where does it say you can't give no refunds up here? Show me where you can't give no refunds at. No, you show me where the it's at.
But that's when the man's exasperation boils over. He slams his fist on the counter, pleading for his money back.
I don't want the food, bro. I don't want to wait another 45 minutes. I don't want her touching I don't want the food, bro. I just want my money back. That's it.
He was just yelling, very upset.
When someone reaches their breaking point and they're heading towards the destruction zone, once that trigger gets flipped, they can flip into a bit of rage.
An hour ago, I don't want the food replaced. You not understand that?
Has their adrenaline surging and their stress hormone called cortisol. That's a really dangerous combination for a severe anger outburst.
I want my money back, bro. That's it. I want my money back.
As the man's voice gets louder, other employees back away.
They're probably really afraid. I don't think they saw this coming.
I want to take my business somewhere else.
But the cashier he's arguing with refuses to back down. And this standoff clearly isn't ending anytime soon.
Okay, give me my money back. So my manager told me not to. Bro.
The man working behind the counter, he's trying his best to reason with this man, but he won't have it.
That's it.
So this man has definitely hit his breaking point. Nothing that this restaurant staff can say to him is going to make him happy in any way.
I didn't do anything wrong. I was just asking for a refund.
I was like, this night might not be good.
It's that simple, bro. It's that simple. I know that. Okay.
Is the man just exasperated? Or is this going to get worse?
I need my money back.
When someone's already at this level of anger, they could start hurting other people.
Give me what's mine. Thank you. I don't want the food. I want what's mine. I don't want to wait for no order. No, give me my money back, bro. That's it.
My manager said I can't do no refund.
Why you can't do no refund?
I asked my manager it was an order from my owner. We can't do no refunds. All we can do is give you the food.
I don't want the food. I don't want to wait. I don't have time to wait on the food again.
Okay.
Okay, so now what do we do?
It's either you get the food remade and you go on about your day and stop yelling at my other manager because that's uncalled for.
And that's when things get out of control.
Things get really ugly from here.
He threw a sign, almost hit me.
This is scary, and nobody knows what this man is thinking.
Does he have a knife? Does he have a gun? We don't know what this guy's next move is.
You don't want the cops, bro. Hey, trust me, I got a businessman, bro. Hey, bro, no. What the do you mean you taking me my money back? Hey.
The raging customer has had enough. He picks up the cash register, crashing it to the floor, along with everything inside. That's when Theron decides to try and intervene.
First gets to that level, there's not much you could do.
But what the man does next scares everyone.
What the do you mean you taking me my money back? Hey, we don't need it for it.
He has thrown the register right into the window, storming out through a pile of shattered glass.
Bro.
And no one knows what this man will do next.
What if there was a gun in his car? He could have come back and started shooting. Anyone who engages with this guy is putting themselves at risk, because if someone wants to, destroy property, the next thing in their path is going to get destroyed too.
Watching it all from the back seat of the car outside, Theron's wife is scared.
My husband was still in there, and I was like, why is he taking so long to get out of the store? Like, this man already left. You don't know if he's gonna come back with something else.
But with the man gone, Theron races back to his family.
I was definitely worried about what's gonna happen next.
Everyone is shaken.
The register went flying. It didn't even land in the sidewalk. It landed in the parking lot. We were gonna park directly behind that same window, but we didn't. If we would have, that register would have flown right into our windshield.
I don't know what this guy was gonna do. He could have grabbed a gun.
I don't know if he was gonna be in the store and take hostage of people. I don't know what he's gonna do. I was worried that he was gonna get in his car and drive into the store, because he already threw the register out of the window. What's driving his car into the other window gonna do to him? Nothing. He's just gonna drive in, drive back out, and leave.
The couple's young children are terrified.
It was scary for my son, because he asked, "Is Daddy okay?"
Employees inside the store call the police, but the man disappears before they arrive.
I think he was more scared that he just wanted to get out of there. He stormed out and got into his car and just backed up fast and took off.
And Theron and his family are in just as much of a rush to leave.
I didn't want to stick around. I don't know if this guy's gonna come back. I don't know what his intentions are.
She's like, let's get out of here. We got the kids in the back.
He could come back with a couple of friends. How far is he willing to go? We just don't know.
Once he is safely at home, Theron decides to post the wild video on social media.
I'm gonna post it on TikTok and see where that goes.
And it took off from there.
That had 10,000 views, really quick. Facebook had 6.4 million.
A video has gone viral after capturing the moment an angry customer vandalized the inside of a Wingstop restaurant in California.
But this boarded up window behind me shows where things got heated.
Thanks for joining us.
A lot of news stations and everyone started posting.
And then he started getting phone calls. He started getting emails from people that wanted to share his video on TV.
Theron says
my parents and everyone started contacting, hey, I seen you on TV again, and it was pretty interesting.
The angry customer was never identified, and police are still trying to figure out who he is. But if they do catch him, he's in for a rude shock.
He may have to pay thousands of dollars for that botched order of wings. damage to the store was upwards of $6,000. And vandalism with damages that high can be considered a felony.
Theron and Flora say they just hope the video offers a lesson to others.
Don't be doing things that you don't want to be caught on camera.
It's not worth it. It's not worth the headache. It's not worth the money. It's not worth, getting a criminal record for it. It's just not worth it.
Hey, we don't need it for it, bro.
It starts with a scream that no one can agree they actually heard, a sound swallowed by the Texas night sometime after midnight, sometime between the hum of cicadas and the distant howl of a freight train cutting through the dark. A scream that may have been real or may have been memory rewriting itself years later, because in small towns memory is as dangerous as evidence, and in the summer of 1999, in a quiet Texas subdivision where porch lights stayed on all night and doors were rarely locked, something happened that would never fully come into focus again. The headline came much later, bold and merciless, the kind that punches through decades of silence: cold case, midnight raid, retired neighbor arrested, words that promised resolution, closure, justice. But back then there were no headlines, only confusion. Only flashing red and blue lights bouncing off ranch-style houses. Only a woman's car abandoned at the edge of a cul-de-sac like it had been set down carefully, as if whoever left it behind expected to come back in a few minutes and never did. Her name was whispered first, then spoken out loud, then shouted into radios and phones, her face printed on flyers that curled in the heat and faded under the sun, her life reduced to a last known location and a last known time, a grocery receipt, a half-empty coffee cup left on the counter. The mundane debris of an ordinary evening that now felt obscene in its normality. She was a mother, a coworker, a familiar face at the local gas station, someone who waved when she drove past, someone whose disappearance would fracture the town into before and after. Police arrived fast, faster than anyone expected, because missing adults were rare here and violent crime even rarer. And as officers walked the street with flashlights cutting thin white lines across lawns and fences, they noticed what didn't belong: tire marks that curved too sharply. A mailbox knocked sideways, a smear on the pavement that could have been oil or could have been something else entirely, something no one wanted to name yet. Neighbors gathered in clusters, bathrobes and bare feet, voices overlapping, everyone offering a detail, a suspicion, a feeling they couldn't quite articulate, and in that noise the first seeds of the mystery were planted. Someone said they saw a truck idling. Someone else said it was a car. Someone insisted they heard arguing. Someone swore there was nothing unusual at all, just another quiet night in Texas. Detectives wrote it all down, knowing even then that most of it would rot on the page, that eyewitness memory decays fast under stress, that certainty hardens into lies without anyone intending it to. Still, they collected what they could, photographing the car, dusting for prints, marking distances with yellow tape that fluttered uselessly in the warm breeze. By morning, the sun exposed everything the dark had hidden and answered nothing. The car revealed no struggle inside, no blood, no clear sign of violence, just fingerprints layered over years of normal use, just the faint smell of perfume clinging to the seats like a ghost. Her purse was gone. Her phone was gone. Whether that meant robbery, staging, or something more intimate was a question that hung heavy in the air, and the word abduction finally made its way into official statements, spoken carefully, reluctantly, like a curse that might summon worse things if said too loudly. The town changed in a matter of hours. Parents kept children inside, doors locked for the first time in years. The local diner buzzed with theories, each one darker than the last, each one naming a different monster, because the idea that the threat could be familiar, local, someone who waved back, was too terrifying to sit with. Detectives canvassed the area again and again, knocking on doors, asking the same questions, watching eyes flicker, watching hands shake, cataloging who seemed too nervous and who seemed not nervous enough. The investigation stretched outward, phone records pulled, bank accounts frozen in time, credit cards watched for any sign of life, helicopters cutting slow circles over nearby fields and patches of scrubland, volunteers forming search lines that moved with grim determination, scanning ditches, culverts, tree lines, finding nothing but discarded beer cans and animal bones bleached white by the sun. Each day without answers deepened the dread, and each night brought new rumors, new alleged sightings miles away, all of them dead ends. Detectives circled back to the beginning, to the people closest to her, because that is where statistics point and where suspicion naturally settles. Friends were questioned. Co-workers were questioned. Family members were questioned until grief curdled into anger and exhaustion. Alibis were checked, rechecked, and quietly doubted. Everyone had been somewhere that night. Everyone had a story. None of them unlocked the mystery. And then there was the neighbor. The retired one. The man who lived 2 houses down, whose schedule never seemed to change, whose lights went off at the same time every night, whose yard was always neat, whose wave was always polite but brief. At first, he was just another name in a long list, another interview conducted and filed away. His answers calm, measured, almost rehearsed, his timeline clean, his cooperation total. Nothing stuck. Nothing held. In 1999, there was no evidence to keep him in the light, no reason to pull him back into the center of the frame, and so he drifted to the edges of the case like so many others. Weeks turned into months. Months into years. The search scaled down. The press moved on. Flyers peeled from telephone poles. The case file thickened with paperwork but thinned of hope, until finally the words no one wanted were spoken behind closed doors. Cold case. Not closed. Not solved. Just cold, a bureaucratic way of saying the trail had vanished, that whatever truth existed was buried under time and dust and the slow erosion of memory. But cold cases do not die quietly. They linger. They wait. They haunt the detectives who work them, the families who live with unanswered questions, the communities that never quite return to normal. Somewhere in that Texas town, the abandoned car was eventually towed away, the street repaved, new families moved in, unaware of the history beneath their feet, unaware that the night of 1999 was still bleeding into the present, still unresolved, still pulsing under the surface. Waiting for something, anything, to disturb the silence again. Time does not move forward in a cold case. It settles like dust. It layers itself over every unanswered question until the original shapes blur, until even the detectives who were there begin to doubt the sharpness of their own memories and in Texas. As the years rolled past the turn of the millennium, the case slipped into that slow, suffocating stillness where nothing officially happens but nothing is ever truly at rest. The file sat on a shelf, thick and heavy, its edges worn for being pulled down again and again by investigators who couldn't let it go, men and women who had seen enough violence to know that disappearances rarely resolve themselves, who understood that silence is not peace but pressure building in the dark. The family learned to live with absence, a skill no one ever wants to master. Holidays arrived like intruders, each one sharpening the loss, each one forcing a decision about whether to set an extra place at the table or finally admit that the chair would remain empty forever. Birthdays passed. Anniversaries passed. The town stopped asking questions out loud, but the looks remained, lingering a second too long whenever someone mentioned her name, the discomfort of a story without an ending. The phrase Texas 1999 cold case became shorthand, a local myth with real blood in its veins. Inside the police department, the case survived on stubbornness. Evidence boxes were relabeled, transferred to newer storage rooms, their contents unchanged. Photographs of the car, witness statements yellowing at the edges, cassette tapes of interviews recorded on outdated equipment, each voice trapped in a moment of raw uncertainty. There were moments when a detective would pull one tape out and listen again, hearing details that felt different now, pauses that seemed longer, answers that sounded less confident than they once did, wondering if time had sharpened perception or simply rewritten it. Technology advanced while the case stood still. DNA became more precise. Databases expanded. Cold case units emerged, built on the belief that time could work for justice as much as it worked against it. A new generation of investigators took a look at old files with fresh eyes, unburdened by the assumptions of the past, trained to question not just suspects but the investigation itself. Why had certain leads been dismissed so quickly? Why had others been chased to exhaustion? Why had some names been circled in red ink while others remained untouched? The neighbor's name appeared again, faint at first, a pencil mark rather than a pen stroke. Not because of new evidence, not because of a confession or a tip, but because of a pattern that only became visible years later. He had lived there a long time. He had known routines. He had been home that night, by his own account, asleep, nothing unusual, nothing to see. At the time, it had sounded like every other alibi. In hindsight, it sounded like the kind of answer that leaves no room for verification. Cold case detectives are taught to distrust neatness. Crimes are messy. Lives are messy. Stories that line up too cleanly often hide something underneath. They went back to the beginning, not to accuse but to understand, remapping the neighborhood as it had existed in 1999, counting steps between houses, timing how long it would take to walk from the neighbor's front door to where the car was found, noting sightlines. Fences that had since been replaced, trees that had grown taller, shadows that no longer fell the same way. They re-interviewed witnesses, knowing full well that memory is unreliable, that decades can warp even the most sincere recollection. Some people remembered more than before. Others remembered less. A few remembered things that directly contradicted what they had once sworn was true. A truck became a car. A voice became two. A time shifted by hours. None of it could be trusted on its own, but together it formed a strange echo, a sense that the original picture had been incomplete. Then there were the tips. Cold cases attract them like moths to a flame. Psychics. Confessions from prison inmates looking for leverage. Anonymous letters written in block capitals, accusing long-dead suspects, pointing to locations already searched. Most were worthless. A few were unsettling. One mentioned the neighbor, not by name but by description, a retired man, quiet, always watching, always there. It wasn't enough to act on. It was enough to remember. The detectives dug into his past, not aggressively at first, more out of professional obligation than conviction. Military service. A stable career. No violent record. No obvious red flags. A marriage that had ended quietly years earlier. Neighbors described him as reserved, helpful when needed, forgettable in a way that can be either reassuring or deeply unsettling. He had aged. His hair had gone gray. His movements had slowed. On the surface, he no longer looked like someone capable of anything sudden or brutal. But time also works on secrets. People talk. They let things slip. A former coworker mentioned temper issues that had never escalated to anything official. An old friend recalled a fixation on order, on control, on routines that could not be disrupted. Small things, insignificant on their own. Together they formed a profile that made detectives uneasy. Not proof, not even strong suspicion. Just discomfort, the sense that a door once closed might need to be opened again. For the family, every call from the police brought a surge of hope followed by the familiar crash. They had learned to manage expectations to guard themselves against optimism, but the idea that someone, anyone, was still working the case mattered. It meant she hadn't been forgotten. It meant the night of 1999 was not finished with him yet. Years passed like this, progress measured in inches rather than miles, until one development shifted the entire weight of the investigation. A piece of evidence long considered useless was re-examined with modern methods. Something overlooked. Something thought too degraded to matter. The kind of discovery that doesn't announce itself loudly, that slips quietly into a lab report and sits there waiting for someone to recognize its implications. The detectives didn't celebrate. They didn't even speak about it openly. Cold cases teach restraint. They teach patience. They teach that premature confidence can destroy years of work. Instead, they began building quietly, rechecking alibis, comparing timelines, watching the neighbor from a distance, noting routines that had barely changed in 2 decades. He still woke early. He still took evening walks. He still kept his yard immaculate. He still lived alone, a man surrounded by familiarity, by a neighborhood that no longer saw him at all. The community, largely unaware of these developments, continued its uneasy coexistence with the past. New families moved in. Children played in the streets where police tape once fluttered. The story became something told in hushed tones to newcomers, a warning, a curiosity, a reminder that even safe places can fracture without warning. And somewhere beneath that everyday normalcy, beneath the noise of modern life, the cold case waited, pressure building again, ready to break the surface in a way no one could yet predict. The first real crack in the silence did not come with sirens or breaking news alerts. It arrived quietly, wrapped in procedural language and laboratory codes, a result that did not accuse anyone outright but refused to be ignored, a signal that the past was no longer inert. The evidence had been there all along, cataloged, sealed, labeled with a date from 1999 that felt almost fictional now, a relic from time before smartphones, before social media, before everyone carried a camera and a tracker in their pocket, and for years it had been dismissed as too compromised, too contaminated, too late. But technology does not respect resignation, and when the lab technicians ran the sample again, refining, isolating, extracting what had once seemed irretrievable, something emerged from the noise. It wasn't a full answer. It wasn't a name. It was a partial profile, fragments of genetic material clinging stubbornly to life, enough to suggest presence, enough to whisper that someone had been closer to her than the investigation had ever officially acknowledged. Detectives stared at the report longer than necessary, absorbing what it meant without allowing themselves the luxury of excitement. Partial DNA does not solve a case. Partial DNA opens doors that have been locked for decades, doors that creak loudly when they move. They went back to the timeline with renewed focus, reconstructing the night not as it had been assumed, but as it might have actually unfolded, minute by minute, step by step. The grocery receipt placed her at the store just before closing. A traffic camera, primitive by today's standards, caught a blur of headlights on a nearby road around the right time. A neighbor remembered hearing a car door slam, a detail once written off as insignificant. Patterns began to form, not clean or symmetrical, but suggestive, like fingerprints smudged just enough to be infuriating. The car's location became central again. Why there? Why that spot? Why not further away? Why not hidden? Why not destroyed? Whoever left it there had known the area, had known how much attention an abandoned vehicle would attract, had known exactly how far to go and when to stop. It was the kind of decision made by someone operating on instinct sharpened by familiarity, not by panic. That realization narrowed the invisible circle around the suspect pool, tightening it without ever fully closing. Detectives returned to the neighbor's house under the pretense of routine, polite, respectful, careful not to spook a man who had lived quietly for decades. He invited them in, offered coffee, spoke about the weather, about retirement, about how much the town had changed. His voice was steady. His eyes were calm. When they asked about 1999, about that night, he repeated the same story he had told years before, word for word in places, as if it had been rehearsed and preserved like a script. Consistency is often praised in alibis. In cold cases, it can feel artificial, like a photograph that never fades. They watched his reactions closely, not for guilt, not for fear, but for deviation, for the micro-expressions that betray effort. He showed concern when her name was mentioned, sympathy when the family came up, irritation only once, quickly masked, when asked if he remembered speaking to police multiple times in the early days. He said, of course. He said he understood. He said he hoped they would find answers. The interview ended the way it had always ended, with nothing concrete to hold on to, with the sense that something essential was still just out of reach. Outside, the detectives compared notes. No smoking gun. No confession. Just a growing discomfort that refused to dissipate. They began to look sideways, at the people around him, the network of lives that intersected briefly and then drifted away. An ex-wife who remembered arguments that scared her but never crossed a legal line. A neighbor from years ago who recalled him watching the street late at night, not suspiciously, just intently. A coworker who remembered him snapping once, unexpectedly, over a minor mistake. These were not crimes. They were textures, the grain of personality that might, under the right pressure, produce something catastrophic. The partial DNA profile went into databases, fishing in deep waters where millions of entries swirled, waiting for a hit that might never come. Weeks passed. Months passed. Each update from the lab was measured, cautious, professional. No direct match. No familial link strong enough to pursue. The case hovered in that painful space between progress and stagnation, where every small step forward is shadowed by the possibility that it still won't be enough. Meanwhile, the family lived in a parallel emotional timeline, oscillating between hope and self-protection. They had learned not to ask for details, not to read too much into tone or timing, but the renewed activity was impossible to ignore. Old wounds reopened. Old questions resurfaced. They wondered what it would mean to finally know, whether certainty would bring relief or simply replace one kind of pain with another. The idea that the truth might involve someone they had waved to, someone they had trusted to live alongside them, was almost unbearable. The town sensed it too, in subtle ways. Police cars appeared more often on familiar streets. Unmarked vehicles parked for hours without explanation. Whispers returned to the diner, quieter now, more cautious, shaped by the knowledge that this was no longer just a story from the past. People began to look at each other differently, measuring, reassessing, wondering what they might have missed, what they might have chosen not to see. Detectives pushed deeper, requesting warrants where they could, moving slowly to avoid alerting anyone prematurely. Financial records were reviewed, Not because money was believed to be a motive, but because transactions leave traces, patterns that can reveal stress, secrecy, or preparation. Phone records, limited by the era, were re-examined with modern analytical tools, cross-referenced against known movements, against work schedules, against habits that had once seemed irrelevant. One detail refused to settle: a gap in the neighbor's timeline that night, a period of roughly 40 minutes unaccounted for, dismissed years earlier as sleep, as nothing worth pursuing. Now it loomed large. 40 minutes was enough time to walk, to drive, to intercept someone returning home, to do something irreversible and return without raising suspicion. It was still circumstantial. It was still fragile. But it was no longer ignorable. The detectives knew what came next, and they knew the risk. To move forward mid-escalation, scrutiny, pressure. It meant transforming a quiet, retired man into the focus of an investigation that would ripple outward, affecting neighbors, families, reputations. Cold cases demand that kind of resolve. They demand a willingness to disturb the present in the name of the past. As summer approached again, echoing the season of the original disappearance, the pieces were aligning in a way that felt both promising and ominous. The partial DNA sat like a loaded question. The timeline gap pulsed with implication. The neighbor continued his routines, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge that the ground beneath him was no longer stable. And in the background, the unresolved night of 1999 pressed closer to the surface, the silence thinning, the pressure building toward a moment that would finally, inevitably break. Pressure changes people, and in cold cases it does so unevenly, creeping in through routine rather than force, through the subtle realization that the past is no longer content to stay buried. The detectives felt at first, that tightening behind the eyes, that sense that every decision now carried weight beyond procedure, because once you lean in, once you allow yourself to believe that the truth is close, there is no clean way to pull back. They moved deliberately, careful not to let urgency show, because urgency is loud and loud things make people hide. They requested permission to quietly collect discarded DNA, a coffee cup here, a tissue there, the kind of evidence that feels invasive even when it is legal, even when it is justified by decades of unanswered questions. Surveillance was discreet, almost old-fashioned, relying less on technology and more on patience, watching patterns, waiting for habits to repeat themselves the way they always do. The neighbor continued his life uninterrupted, unaware that every mundane gesture was now being observed through a different lens. He shopped at the same grocery store. He spoke to the same cashier. He lingered in the same aisles. He returned home at predictable times, his car easing into the driveway as if guided by muscle memory alone. To anyone else, he was invisible, another aging man passing through his days. To the detectives, he was becoming a question mark that refused to resolve. The DNA sample came back inconclusive at first, then again, each report a careful dance of probabilities and limitations. Partial matches are cruel that way, promising proximity without certainty. They tell you that you are near something important without telling you exactly where to step. The lab cautioned patience. The detectives heard challenge. They shifted focus again, not abandoning the genetic trail but supplementing it, layering context over chemistry. They examined the neighbor's movements in the years after 1999, looking for changes that might suggest guilt or fear, a sudden move, a job change, a withdrawal from the community. They found nothing dramatic. No flight, no breakdown, just continuity, steady and unremarkable. In some ways, that was the most disturbing part. Cold cases often resolve because someone cracks, because time erodes loyalty or courage or silence. In this case, time seemed to have done the opposite. The neighbor had settled into himself, into his routines, into a life so consistent it felt fortified. The detectives wondered whether that steadiness was innocence or practice. They revisited the physical environment once more, this time not as investigators but as theorists, imagining scenarios without committing to them, asking not who did it but how it could have been done. They stood where the car had been found, measured distances again, listened to the ambient noise at night, noting how sound traveled, how easily a raised voice could dissolve into background hum. They walked the route from the neighbor's house, timing it, feeling the incline of the street, the texture of the pavement. It was close. Too close to ignore. A detail from the original report surfaced again, something almost laughably small, something that had never made it into headlines or public discussion. A scuff mark near the driver's side door, not clearly identifiable as anything specific, not clearly human or mechanical. At the time, it had been logged and forgotten. Now it was photographed again, enhanced digitally, compared against footwear common in the late 90s. The results were ambiguous, but ambiguity is the currency of cold cases. It buys you permission to keep going. The family was brought in for another meeting, the tone careful, the language precise. Detectives spoke of renewed efforts, of advances, of possibilities without promises. They watched faces change as hope flickered, as restraint fought against longing. The family asked the same questions they had asked years earlier, questions that had no satisfying answers then and still didn't now. Who would do this? Why her? Why here? The detectives did not mention the neighbor by name. They did not need to. In small towns, intuition spreads faster than information. The family had their own memories, their own mental inventory of who had been close, who had been present, who had seemed too interested or not interested enough. The idea settled in their minds quietly, unspoken, heavy. As scrutiny intensified, the neighbor began to notice subtle changes, though it was unclear whether he understood their meaning. A police car passed his house more often. A detective waved once, lingering a moment longer than courtesy required. A knock on the door came later one evening, a follow-up question about something trivial, something from years ago. He answered politely, but something in his posture shifted, a stiffness that had not been there before. Fear does not always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like irritation. Sometimes it looks like compliance stretched thin. The detectives filed that observation away, careful not to overinterpret. Cold cases teach discipline. They teach that desire can masquerade as insight if you let it. The breakthrough, when it came, did not arrive alone. It arrived with paperwork, with phone calls, with quiet confirmations passed between people who had learned not to celebrate too early. A familial DNA connection surfaced, distant but statistically significant, pointing toward a relative of the neighbor, someone who had voluntarily submitted DNA years earlier for an unrelated reason. It was not proof. It was a direction. Now the investigation had momentum that could not be contained indefinitely. Warrants were requested, justified by cumulative evidence, by timelines, by genetic probability, by decades of unresolved disappearance. Each signature moved the case closer to a moment that would change everything, for the family, for the town, for the man who had lived 2 houses down all along. The search of the neighbor's property was conducted with clinical restraint, no media, no spectacle, just officers and evidence technicians moving through rooms that had never been touched by law enforcement before. They found nothing obvious. No hidden room. No bloodstains. No trophies. What they did find was order, meticulous and consistent, a place where nothing seemed out of place, a place where it was hard to imagine chaos ever intruding. But absence can be evidence too. The lack of personal clutter. The lack of mementos. The lack of anything that suggested emotional mess. The detectives exchanged looks they did not verbalize. They collected what they could, soil samples, fibers, tools, items that would be meaningless to anyone else. When the neighbor was informed that he was now a person of interest, the words landed without drama, delivered professionally, calmly. He did not shout. He did not cry. He asked what that meant. He asked if he needed a lawyer. He nodded when told that was his right. His voice remained steady, but his eyes no longer met theirs. Outside, the town began to stir. Rumors sharpened into whispers with edges. People revisited old conversations, old impressions, the way he had watched, the way he had kept to himself, the way nothing about him had ever demanded attention. That was the unsettling part, the realization that evil does not always announce itself, that sometimes it lives quietly, blends inwaits. The detectives knew they were close, closer than they had ever been, but proximity brought its own terror. If they were wrong, the damage would be irreparable. If they were right, the truth would be devastating in ways no one could fully anticipate. The case had crossed a threshold where there was no longer a safe outcome, only resolution or failure. As the paperwork moved through channels and the lab continued its work, the night of 1999 felt nearer than it had in years, its shadows lengthening into the present. Somewhere in that overlap between past and now, between suspicion and certainty, the cold case was preparing to shed its silence, and when it did, it would do so with a force that no one in that Texas town was ready to absorb. Momentum in an investigation is a dangerous thing, Because it feels like clarity even when it is still only direction. And in the days that followed the neighbor being named a person of interest, every movement carried the weight of consequence. The detectives tightened their circle, not outward toward the town, but inward, toward the narrow band of time and space where theory could still become fact. They knew that if the case was going to break, it would not be with spectacle, but with precision, with one undeniable connection anchoring decades of doubt to a single reality. The lab results arrived in stages, each one incremental, each one demanding interpretation rather than delivering certainty. The familial DNA links strengthened under further analysis, probabilities shifting, margins narrowing. It was not enough to stand alone in court, not yet, but it changed the language of internal conversations. Words like possible gave way to likely. Interesting became significant. No one said guilty. Not out loud. They began reconstructing the neighbor's life in 1999 with obsessive detail, not just where he had been, but how he had lived. Work schedules, retirement planning documents, medical records that hinted at stress and insomnia around the time of the disappearance. Nothing dramatic, nothing explosive, but a constellation of small pressures converging in a single year. The detectives understood how thin that line was, how easily it could be dismissed as coincidence, but cold cases are built on patterns others are too quick to ignore. A former acquaintance from that era came forward quietly, a man who had lived on the edge of the neighbor's social circle and had long since moved away. He did not call police immediately. He wrestled with the decision for weeks, replaying old memories that had taken on new meaning. When he finally sat down with detectives, his voice shook as he described a conversation from years ago, a passing remark about people getting what they deserved, about women who led men on, about how easy it would be to make someone disappear in a place where no one paid attention. At the time, it had sounded like bitterness. Now it sounded like something else entirely. Still, it was not enough. Statements fade. Memories distort. The detectives needed something physical, something immutable, something that could survive cross-examination and skepticism. They returned again to the scene, not the sanitized version that existed now, but the version preserved in photographs and diagrams, overlaying them with modern mapping tools, adjusting for changes in infrastructure and landscape. When they did, a new possibility emerged, subtle but unsettling. The route from the abandoned car to a drainage area on the edge of the neighborhood was shorter than originally believed, partially concealed by overgrowth that had since been cleared. In 1999, it would have been invisible from the street, a place where something could be hidden temporarily, a place where no one would look unless they knew it was there. Search efforts back then had focused outward, on highways and rural land, not inward, on the mundane spaces people pass every day without seeing. The decision to search again was not taken lightly. Excavation brings finality. It also brings risk. If nothing was found, the momentum could collapse under its own weight. But the detectives were past caution now. They had learned that restraint had already cost the case too much time. The search was conducted quietly at first, then with increasing urgency as soil samples revealed disturbances inconsistent with natural settling. Equipment hummed. Shovels bit into the ground. Officers stood in silence, aware that this was the kind of moment that rewrites careers and lives in a single afternoon. The ground yielded fragments, not answers yet, but hints, fabric fibers degraded by moisture, a small personal item so ordinary it was devastating, something that belonged to her, something that should never have been there. The news did not break immediately. It was verified, re-verified, handled with the care owed to both evidence and family. When the confirmation came, it arrived like a blow to the chest, a mixture of relief and grief so intense it left people momentarily speechless. The disappearance was no longer abstract. It had weight. It had place. It had permanence. The neighbor was brought in again, this time under circumstances that stripped away the casual politeness of earlier interviews. The room was small. The lights were unforgiving. He was informed of the new developments without accusation, without raised voices. He listened. He nodded. He asked for water. When shown photographs, his face tightened almost imperceptibly, a reaction so small it might have been imagined. But the detectives saw it, and they knew they were watching a man confront the collapse of a story he had been telling himself for decades. He denied everything. Calmly. Methodically. He expressed sympathy. He expressed shock. He asked how such a terrible mistake could have been made. His lawyer arrived and the interview ended, leaving behind a silence thick with implication. Outside the station, the town was already shifting. Word leaked, as it always does, and speculation exploded into certainty in the court of public opinion. People replayed every interaction they had ever had with a neighbor, searching for signs they believed must have been there all along. Others recoiled, insisting that this was impossible, that they had known him too long, that the police must be reaching. Communities fracture under this kind of strain, lines drawn not by evidence but by belief. The family was informed privately, with compassion and clarity. They listened. They cried. They asked if this meant it was finally over. The detectives could not say yes. Not yet. Justice requires patience even when truth feels close enough to touch. The legal process moved forward with a gravity that made every step feel heavier than the last. Charges were discussed. Timelines refined. Evidence organized into narratives that could be understood by people who had not lived with a case for decades. The phrase Texas 1999 cold case solved began to circulate internally, cautiously, almost superstitiously, as if saying it too loudly might undo everything. The neighbor returned home that night under scrutiny he had never experienced before, his once invisible life suddenly illuminated from every angle. Cameras appeared at the edge of the street. Voices rose behind closed doors. He closed his curtains and locked his doors, perhaps for the first time, a man who had lived for years without fear now surrounded by it. The detectives watched and waited, knowing that the final pieces still had to fall into place, knowing that the truth, once unearthed, does not reveal itself all at once. It comes in waves, each one stronger than the last, until resistance is no longer possible. And somewhere in the overlap between evidence and inevitability, the cold case tightened its grip, pulling everyone closer to an ending that would not bring peace, only answers, and the irreversible knowledge of how long the truth had been hiding in plain sight. The moment a case crosses from investigation into prosecution, the air changes, heavier, more formal, stripped of speculation and charged with consequence, because now every theory must be translated into fact, every instinct into something that can survive the harsh light of a courtroom. The detectives felt that shift immediately. Their conversations narrowed. Their language sharpened. There was no longer room for maybes or what-ifs, only for what could be proven, defended, repeated without contradiction. The evidence was laid out again, not as fragments but as a sequence, each piece positioned to support the next, a story designed not for intuition but for 12 strangers who would one day be asked to decide whether a quiet retired neighbor had been hiding something monstrous since 1999. The partial DNA, the familial link, the recovered personal items, the timeline gap, the proximity, the statements, all of it was scrutinized mercilessly because defense attorneys specialize in turning doubt into a weapon. They rehearsed the weak points. The DNA was not definitive. The remains were incomplete. The memories were old. The search had come decades later. Every flaw was cataloged, every vulnerability exposed, not to abandon the case, but to fortify it. Cold cases do not win by pretending they are perfect. They win by acknowledging imperfection and showing that, despite it, the truth remains intact. The neighbor's lawyer moved aggressively, filing motions, challenging warrants, questioning the integrity of evidence collected so long after the fact. He painted a picture of overzealous investigators chasing a narrative, of a man being punished for living quietly, for fitting a profile built on hindsight rather than fact. It was a familiar strategy, effective, persuasive, and dangerous. Meanwhile, the neighbor himself began to change. Not dramatically. Not in ways that would satisfy those craving, obvious guilt. The change was subtle, internal, visible only to those watching closely. His routines fractured. He stopped walking at night. He avoided eye contact with neighbors. He declined interviews. His house, once immaculate, showed signs of neglect, small at first, then unmistakable. Fear does that, or exhaustion, or the knowledge that control is slipping. The detectives requested one final interview, a last attempt to hear the story directly, to offer an opportunity for explanation, for humanity, for something beyond denial. He agreed, perhaps out of confidence, perhaps out of resignation. The room was different this time. Larger. Recorded from multiple angles. His lawyers sat close, attentive, ready to intervene. They spoke calmly, deliberately, walking through the night of 1999 again, this time with precision sharpened by years of analysis. Times were mentioned. Distances. Locations. They asked the same questions they had asked before, but now each one carried context, implication. His answers remained consistent, but consistency can become brittle under pressure. A time shifted slightly. A detail was corrected too quickly. A memory appeared where none had existed before. The detectives did not react. They let the silence do the work. When they showed him the familial DNA connection, explained it carefully, methodically, he leaned back, crossed his arms, and smiled faintly, a gesture that read as disbelief to some, as defiance to others. He said science makes mistakes. He said coincidences happen. He said he had lived an honest life. His lawyer nodded. The interview ended without confession, without confrontation, without closure. Outside, the world moved faster than the law ever does. News broke. Headlines exploded. Texas 1999 cold case solved. They read, premature and absolute, a declaration that felt satisfying but fragile. The town reacted with a mix of vindication and horror. Some felt relief, believing the nightmare finally had a face. Others felt betrayed, angry at the idea that someone so familiar could be accused. Social lines hardened. Conversations ended abruptly. Trust eroded. The family stayed mostly silent, their grief now public property, whether they wanted it or not. They were asked how it felt. They were asked if they believed the arrest would come. They were asked to perform closure before it had arrived. Privately, they wrestled with emotions that contradicted each other violently, relief tangled with rage, hope poisoned by the fear that even now, after everything, the truth might slip away again. As court dates approached, the prosecution continued to build, adding context, refining arguments, anticipating defense strategies. They consulted experts, psychologists who spoke about control and familiarity, forensic specialists who explained degradation and probability, historians who contextualized investigative limitations of the late 90s. Every explanation was designed to bridge the gap between then and now, to make jurors understand why answers had taken so long. The neighbor sat through hearings with the same reserved posture, his face a mask that revealed nothing. To some, that read as innocence. To others, as calculation. In cold cases, demeanor becomes evidence in the public imagination, even when it should not. The detectives avoided that trap. They focused on facts, on what could be shown, not felt. Late one evening, as preparation continued, a development arrived unexpectedly, the kind that could tilt an already delicate case towards certainty or collapse. A sealed box from the original evidence room, mislabeled and forgotten, was opened during a routine audit. Inside was an item that had never been tested, never been logged properly, a failure not of malice but of error, when resources were thinner and priorities brutal. The item was small, ordinary, but it carried potential. It was sent to the lab immediately, the detectives refusing to speculate even as anticipation clawed at them. Days stretched. Calls went unanswered. The wait became unbearable. When the results finally came in, they did not explode across the room. They landed quietly, devastating in their clarity. The DNA was stronger here, cleaner, still aged, still imperfect, but unmistakably connected, reinforcing what had once been circumstantial, tightening the net that had been cast so carefully over decades. The prosecutors adjusted their strategy overnight. The defense recalculated. The neighbor was informed. This time the news landed differently. His shoulders sagged. His eyes lingered on the table longer than before. He said nothing. Silence, at last, felt heavy around him. The detectives left the room knowing something fundamental had shifted. Not resolution, not justice yet, but inevitability. The kind that creeps in slowly, then all at once. The cold case, dormant for so long, was no longer just awake. It was moving toward an end that would rewrite the past and redefine the present, whether anyone was ready for it or not. Inevitability is not loud. It does not announce itself with certainty or triumph. It settles into a room and changes how people breathe, how they sit, how they look at one another, and in the weeks that follow the discovery of the mislabeled evidence. Everyone involved felt that shift, even if they refused to name it. The case no longer felt fragile. It felt heavy, anchored by something real, something that could not be waved away as coincidence or contamination. The past had finally left fingerprints strong enough to survive the present. The prosecutors slowed down deliberately, resisting the pressure to rush. Because speed is the enemy of endurance. Every piece of evidence was revisited again, not to admire it, but to attack it, to imagine how it would be dismantled by cross-examination, how doubt would be seeded and cultivated. They built redundancies, multiple paths leading to the same conclusion, so that even if one strand frayed, the structure will hold. Cold cases require that kind of architecture. The defense, sensing the shift, changed tone. The aggressive motion softened into procedural challenges. The rhetoric cooled. Public statements became cautious, less absolute. This was not surrender. It was recalibration. Experienced attorneys know when to stop shouting and start listening, when to prepare not just for trial but for outcome. The neighbor remained outwardly composed, but those closest to him noticed the erosion. His voice lost some of its steadiness. His sleep, according to jail intake records, was fragmented. He asked for books he never finished. He asked for news updates, then stopped asking altogether. Time, which had once worked in his favor, now pressed down on him relentlessly. The detectives requested access to his personal writings, journals, old notebooks kept from his working years, documents he had never considered dangerous. People often confess to paper in ways they never would to another human being, not directly, not in words like "I did it," but in patterns, obsessions, repeated grievances that sketch the outline of a darker internal world. What they found was not a confession. It was a mood, persistent and unresolved, anger expressed in rigid language, a fixation on order violated, on people who disrupted routines and deserved consequences. Again, not proof. But context is powerful when it accumulates. Expert witnesses were prepared, not to sensationalize, but to explain. Psychologists spoke of control as a motive, of how ordinary-seeming individuals can commit extraordinary violence when their internal rules are broken. Forensic analysts detailed the science carefully, anticipating skepticism, explaining margins, limitations, and why partial does not mean meaningless. Every explanation was designed to build trust, to guide rather than overwhelm. The family met with prosecutors in a quiet room far from cameras and microphones. They were shown timelines, diagrams, photographs they had never seen before. Each image landed like a blow, but they asked to see them anyway. They wanted to understand. They wanted to be certain that this was not another false dawn. When the meeting ended, no one spoke for a long time. Understanding does not heal. It only sharpens the truth. Outside that room, the town continued to fracture and reform. Yard signs appeared, some declaring support for the family, others warning against rushing to judgment. Conversations in public spaces lowered to murmurs. People who had lived side by side for years now measured their words carefully, aware that loyalty and morality were no longer aligned the way they once were. As trial dates approached, the media attention intensified. Old footage was replayed. Photographs from 1999 filled screens again. Reporters spoke the language of closure and justice, compressing decades of uncertainty into sound bites. The detectives avoided interviews. They had learned how easily nuances flattened into narrative. This case did not need embellishment. It needed accuracy. The neighbor was offered a deal. Not an admission of guilt in exchange for leniency, but opportunity to speak, to provide information that might bring some measure of peace to the family. The offer was presented neutrally, without threat or promise. He listened. He asked questions. He said he needed time. That time passed without response. Then, unexpectedly, something shifted. During a routine transport, he asked to speak to one of the original detectives, a man who had been there in 1999, who had knocked on his door when the case was still warm. The request was granted cautiously. They sat across from each other in a small room. No cameras this time, just two men separated by decades of silence. The neighbor spoke slowly, choosing words with care. He talked about memory, about how unreliable it is, about how people convince themselves of things to survive. He talked about regret without specifying its source. He talked about the night of 1999 in abstract terms, as if describing weather rather than events. He did not confess. He did not deny. He circled the truth so closely it felt like orbit. The detective listened, saying very little, allowing the space to fill with what was not being said. When the meeting ended, there was no statement, no breakthrough to report, only the sense that something inside the neighbor had cracked, that the silence he had carried for so long was no longer airtight. Back in the evidence room, technicians prepared final exhibits, mounting photographs, labeling samples, preserving chains of custody that stretched back into another century. Every label, every seal, every signature mattered now. Mistakes that might have been survivable years ago would be fatal here. The prosecutors finalized their case, aware that even with everything they had, nothing was guaranteed. Juries are unpredictable. Doubt is persuasive. And cold cases, no matter how strong, always carry the weight of time as both ally and adversary. As the trial date loomed, the night of 1999 felt closer than ever, its edges sharpening, its shadows pressing into the present. The community braced itself, the family held on, the detectives prepared to let go, knowing that soon the story they had carried for so long would belong to the court, and that whatever the verdict, the truth, once spoken, could never be returned to silence. Courtrooms have a way of draining color from everything, reducing decades of emotion into wood, glass, and procedure, and when a trial finally began, it felt less like a climax than an exposure, the slow lifting of something that had been pressed into darkness for far too long. The neighbor entered each morning under guard, his expression neutral, his movements careful, a man who had lived most of his life unnoticed, now dissected by strangers from across the state. The family sat together, close enough to feel each other breathe, eyes fixed forward, unwilling to look at him longer than necessary, unwilling not to. Opening statements did not promise drama. They promised truth. The prosecution spoke of time, of how justice does not expire, of how technology can resurrect voices thought lost. They did not describe violence in detail. They described proximity, opportunity, control. A life interrupted and hidden within walking distance of its own front door. The defense countered with doubt, with the danger of hindsight, with the seduction of a tidy ending to an untidy mystery. They warned the jury against mistaking persistence for proof. Witnesses came in waves. Detectives first, walking jurors through the early hours of the disappearance, the confusion, the noise, the decisions made under pressure with limited tools. They acknowledged mistakes openly, not as weakness but as context, explaining what could not be known in 1999, what could only be understood now. Jurors listened closely, some nodding, others reserved, all aware that they were being asked to judge not just a man, but a timeline that stretched across half their lives. The forensic testimony followed, precise and restrained. Experts explained partial DNA with diagrams and analogies, careful to emphasize probability without overselling certainty. They showed how degraded material can still speak, how independent samples can converge on the same conclusion. The mislabeled evidence was introduced carefully, its chain of custody laid bare, its rediscovery framed not as miracle but as diligence. The defense cross-examined aggressively, probing contamination, questioning interpretation, highlighting every gap. The experts held steady. Science, they reminded the room, does not shout. It accumulates. Then came the witnesses who brought texture rather than data. Former neighbors, old co-workers, the acquaintance who remembered the conversation years ago, his voice unsteady as he admitted his regret for not speaking sooner. Each account was small, incomplete, but together they formed a portrait that felt increasingly difficult to ignore. The defense challenged memory, motivation, relevance. The jury weighed credibility in real time, watching faces as much as listening to words. When photographs were introduced, the room changed. Images from the excavation, from the recovered items, from places once walked without thought. The family held hands. Some jurors looked away. Others leaned forward, compelled despite themselves. The prosecution did not linger. The point was not shock. It was reality. The neighbor did not testify. His right, his choice. His silence was filled instead by arguments about character, about the absence of a criminal record, about the danger of condemning a man based on inference. The defense reminded jurors that quiet lives could be mistaken for sinister ones when viewed through the wrong lens. The prosecution reminded them that familiarity is often the mask that allows harm to happen unnoticed. Closing arguments arrived not with fire, but with gravity. The prosecution spoke of a woman who never came home, of community that carried unanswered questions for decades, of evidence that now pointed in one direction, no matter how uncomfortable that direction was. They asked the jury not for vengeance, but for recognition, for acknowledgement that what had happened mattered enough to be named. The defense asked for restraint. They asked jurors to imagine living under suspicion for years, to imagine being judged by fragments and assumptions. They asked whether doubt still existed, and whether that doubt was reasonable. Deliberations began behind closed doors, and the waiting resumed, the familiar ache of uncertainty returning in a new form. Hours passed. Then days. The family waited in silence. The detectives waited with a different kind of tension, knowing that whatever happened next would define their work forever. The town waited too. Conversations paused mid-sentence, eyes drawn toward the courthouse as if answers might leak through the walls. Inside the jury room, the night of 1999 was replayed again and again, not as memory, but as evidence, each juror carrying their own threshold for certainty, their own tolerance for doubt. Outside, the cold case hovered at the edge of resolution, no longer dormant, no longer silent, but not yet complete, suspended in a moment that felt as fragile and decisive as the night it all began. Waiting has its own sound, a low, constant hum that settles into the bones, and as the jury deliberated, that sound filled every hallway of the courthouse, every living room in town where television stayed on without being watched. The family learned to measure time in coffee refills and quiet glances. Detectives learned to sit with stillness again, a discipline honed over decades of cold cases where answers move at their own pace and never on command. Inside the jury room, the past was dismantled and rebuilt piece by piece. Timelines were sketched on whiteboards. Photographs were passed from hand to hand. Words like likely and possible were weighed against beyond a reasonable doubt. Some jurors gravitated toward the science, finding reassurance in probabilities that converged from multiple directions. Others lingered on the absence of a single, irrefutable moment, the missing confession, the missing eyewitness who could say they saw it happen. Doubt did not argue loudly. It whispered. They returned again and again to proximity, to how close everything had been, how little distance separated the ordinary from the catastrophic. They discussed the neighbors' routines, the timeline gap, the way the car had been placed just far enough away to delay discovery without inviting suspicion. They argued about whether normalcy should count for or against a person, whether a life without visible cracks is evidence of innocence or simply of discipline. Outside, the town fractured along familiar lines. Some were convinced the truth had finally surfaced, that the years of silence had been earned, not accidental. Others clung to the idea that the case had been shaped to fit a suspect, that a need for closure had hardened into certainty. Conversations ended abruptly. Old friendships cooled. The case was no longer just about 1999. It was about who people believe themselves to be now. The neighbors sat alone in a holding area, guarded, quiet, reading the same page of a book without turning it. Time, which had once been his shield, now pressed in from every direction. Each hour of deliberation narrowed his future without revealing which shape it would take. He had lived so long with the past contained, compartmentalized, that the act of being examined felt like exposure, like standing under a light that could not be dimmed. Late in the afternoon of the second day, the bailiff's footsteps echoed down the hall with purpose, and heads turned instinctively. The jury had reached a verdict. The words traveled faster than confirmation, a ripple of motion and breath that pulled everyone toward the courtroom. The family stood together. The detectives followed. The neighbor was brought in last, his hands folded, his face unreadable. The room settled. The judge asked the jury foreperson to rise. The air thickened, heavy with decades of anticipation compressed into a single moment. The verdict was read aloud, steady, formal, stripped of emotion by design. Guilty. The word landed not as an explosion, but as a collapse, a release that felt almost physical. Some gasped. Some cried. Some stared ahead in stunned silence. The neighbor did not react immediately. Then his shoulders slumped slightly, as if a weight he had been carrying invisibly had finally shifted. He blinked several times, his gaze dropping to the table. His lawyer leaned in, whispering words that did not seem to reach him. The judge thanked the jury, their faces pale, their expressions conflicted, the knowledge of what they had just done settling in slowly. Sentencing was scheduled for a later date, but the meaning of the moment was already clear. The Texas 1999 cold case was no longer an abstraction, no longer a question mark. It had been named, anchored, decided by 12 people who would carry that decision with them for the rest of their lives. Outside, cameras flashed. Microphones appeared. Headlines assembled themselves in real time. Words like solved and justice competing for space with decades later and neighbor arrested. The family stepped into the glare briefly, offering few words, their grief too deep, too personal to translate into sound bites. They spoke of gratitude. They spoke of remembrance. They did not speak of closure. The detectives watched from a distance, aware that their role was ending, that the story they had chased for so long now belonged to public record. Some felt relief. Others felt an unexpected emptiness, the kind that follows resolution after prolonged pursuit. Cold cases become companions. Letting them go is not as simple as it seems. As evening fell, the town exhaled unevenly. Some felt safer. Others felt exposed, newly aware of how thin the veneer of normalcy can be. The neighbor's house sat dark, curtains drawn, a place that had once blended into the street, now marked forever by association. Children were kept inside that night. Doors were locked. The past had caught up, and the present did not yet know how to absorb it. But even with a verdict, the case refused to settle neatly. Questions lingered. Why her? Why that night? Why so close? The jury had answered the legal question. The human questions remained, circling, unresolved, reminding everyone that justice, while necessary, does not erase mystery. As night wrapped the courthouse and the town beyond it, the echoes of 1999 finally began to fade, not into silence, but into something heavier and more complicated: acknowledgement. The cold case had been solved in the eyes of the law, but its shadow stretched forward, altering how the community remembered its past and how it would look at itself in the years still to come. Sentencing arrived without spectacle, stripped of the drama that had surrounded the verdict. Because the law does not perform grief, it measures consequence, and the courtroom felt smaller that day, compressed by the understanding that nothing said now could change what had already been decided. The judge spoke in a voice trained to be steady, recounting facts that had once been scattered across decades and now lived in a single narrative: a life interrupted, a trust abused, a silence maintained long enough to calcify into routine. The neighbor stood and listened, his hands resting on the rail, his posture rigid, as if holding himself together required constant effort. When given the opportunity to speak, he did not offer an apology in the way people expect apologies to sound. He spoke about age, about illness, about a life that had already narrowed. He spoke about how long it had been. He did not speak her name. The absence was noticed. It echoed louder than any confession would have. The judge listened without interruption, then imposed the sentence with careful clarity: years that stretched beyond any reasonable expectation of freedom, a legal acknowledgement that time served quietly is not time forgiven. The family sat through it without visible reaction, grief long since tempered into endurance. They had prepared statements and read them in voices that trembled only slightly, words chosen to honor memory rather than inflame anger. They spoke of who she had been before she became evidence, before her name was paired forever with a year and a place. They spoke of birthdays missed, of grandchildren never met, of a house that never quite felt full again. They did not speak to him directly. Some distances remained even in judgment. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different, thinner, as if something long trapped had finally been released. The headlines followed quickly, efficient and definitive, repeating the phrase that had traveled so far to arrive here: Texas 1999 cold case solved. It appeared on screens and front pages, framed as an ending, a triumph of persistence and science and patience. People shared it, commented on it, consumed it in minutes. For them, the story concluded neatly. For those who lived inside it, the shape of the ending was more complicated. The detectives returned to their offices and closed files that had been open longer than some of their careers. They archived evidence with finality this time, labels marked complete, chains of custody ending not in question but in conclusion. There was satisfaction in that, a professional pride that came from seeing something through to the end, but it was tempered by the knowledge that resolution does not restore what was taken. Cold cases end, but they do not rewind. Some detectives retired soon after, their work done, their patience spent. Others took on new cases, carrying lessons learned into fresh investigations. They spoke less about instincts and more about humility, about how easy it is to overlook the familiar, how dangerous it can be to assume that monsters announce themselves. The case became a training example, a cautionary tale, a reminder that time can hide truth just as effectively as distance. The town began the slow process of recalibration. Conversations shifted from speculation to reflection. People apologized to one another for things said in anger, for alliances drawn too sharply. Some friendships did not survive. Others deepened, forged by shared recognition that safety is not guaranteed by routine. The street where it had happened looked the same, but people walked it differently now, more aware of shadows, more conscious of who lived behind which door. The neighbor's house was sold quietly months later, the transaction handled with minimal fuss, a line item in public records that did not mention history. New owners moved in unaware of everything at first, then gradually informed. As these things inevitably surface, they painted the walls. They replaced the locks. They try to make it theirs. Places remember even when people try not to. In prison, the neighbor aged quickly. Routine replaced routine, control exchanged for confinement. He received letters, then fewer letters, then almost none. He spent time in the library, reading histories he would never be part of, narratives that moved forward without him. Guards described him as compliant, quiet, unremarkable. The kind of inmate who disappears into the system the same way he once disappeared into the neighborhood. Occasionally, he spoke about memory, about how the mind edits itself, about how guilt and justification can coexist without touching. He never provided details. He never filled in the blanks people most wanted filled. The truth, once forced into the open, did not suddenly become generous. It remained guarded, partial, shaped by the limits of what could be proven rather than everything that had been lived. For the family, life resumed its uneven rhythm. They visited a grave that finally existed. They held a memorial that did not need the word missing attached to it. They allowed themselves moments of quiet happiness without guilt, a skill learned slowly and imperfectly. They still wondered. They always would. But wondering no longer felt like drowning. It felt like remembering. Anniversaries came and went with less fanfare. The media moved on, chasing newer stories, fresher horrors. The phrase cold case lost its urgency again, returning to the background noise of true crime podcasts and late-night specials. But in that Texas town, the case remained present, a shared reference point, a reminder of how long silence can last and how suddenly it can end. Schools invited detectives to speak about the investigation, about perseverance, about the importance of paying attention. Students listened with the detached curiosity of those who believe the past is safely distant. Some teachers lingered after, asking quieter questions, thinking about their own neighborhoods, their own assumptions. The evidence room held fewer secrets now, but the echo of the case lingered there too, in the knowledge that not every disappearance ends with a verdict, not every truth waits patiently for technology to catch up. This one had. Barely. By the narrowest of margins. As years passed, the language softened. People stopped saying the neighbor. They used his name less often. They spoke more about her, about what she liked, about the sound of her laugh, about the ordinary details that had been eclipsed by mystery. In that shift, something important happened. The case receded, and the person returned. And yet, even with sentencing complete, even with headlines archived and files closed, the story refused to settle entirely. Because endings imposed by courts are not the same as endings experienced by communities. They answer questions the law is equipped to ask and leave the rest to time. On quiet nights, when cicadas filled the air and trains passed in the distance, people still thought about that summer in 1999, about how easily a scream could disappear into darkness, about how normal the street had looked the next morning. They thought about how long it took to listen properly. The cold case had been solved, yes, but its lesson remained unresolved, lingering in the spaces between houses and years, a reminder that truth does not always announce itself when it arrives, and that sometimes it waits, patient and relentless, until someone finally dares to disturb the silence. Long after the sentence was read, the courtroom emptied, after the microphones were packed away and the lights dimmed. The case continued to breathe in quieter places, in the pauses between conversations, in the way people hesitated before saying they felt safe. Closure, it turned out, was not a door that slammed shut, but a corridor that narrowed slowly, step by careful step, forcing everyone to pass through memories they would have preferred to leave untouched. The town learned that solving a cold case does not thaw it all at once. The ice cracks unevenly, revealing layers of fear preserved beneath the surface. The house where it began stood in afternoon light, unremarkable to anyone passing through without context, a rectangle of siding and windows that caught the sun like any other. Yet those who knew the story felt a subtle pressure when they looked at it, as if the air nearby were heavier. Children grew up hearing fragments, half-warnings disguised as advice, told not to wander too far, not because danger lurked everywhere, but because it once had unnoticed, wearing a familiar face. Parents watched from porches longer than they used to. Trust, once broken, repairs itself slowly and never invisibly. The investigators, now scattered across different chapters of their lives, still thought about the case when sleep came reluctantly. They remembered the smell of old paper in storage rooms, the weight of evidence bags that carried more than objects, the feeling of reopening something the past had tried to seal. They remembered the moment the DNA hit, the brief, electric silence before reality caught up, before the implications spread outward like ripples in a pond. They understood now that persistence is not heroic in the movie's way. It is repetitive, exhausting, and often lonely. But it works. Sometimes. In lectures and interviews, they avoided dramatic language. They spoke instead about systems, about databases and patience, about the danger of assuming, what a neighborhood looks like from the outside. When asked what kept them going, they paused longer than the question expected. Some said duty. Some said stubbornness. One said he couldn't stand the idea of her being remembered only as a mystery. That answer lingered with audiences longer than any technical explanation ever could. The family learned to navigate a world where sympathy no longer arrived automatically. The casseroles stopped coming. The calls slowed. Grief lost its headline value. What remained was quieter but deeper, a relationship with absence that had changed shape but not weight. They sorted through old belongings with new eyes, no longer wondering if she might return to claim them, but deciding which pieces of her life should be carried forward. They laughed sometimes while telling stories about her, surprising themselves, then letting the sound exist without apology. They visited schools, community centers, anywhere people would listen, not to recount the crime, but to talk about memory, about refusing to let years erase a person's name. They learned that remembrance is an active choice, something you do, not something that simply happens. Each telling felt like pushing back against the silence that had once swallowed everything. The man who had lived as a neighbor for so long became a footnote in the way people spoke, a caution rather than a fixation. His image faded from lawns and mailboxes and casual recollections. The focus shifted, slowly but deliberately, to the life that had been interrupted, to the ways she filled rooms, to the small habits that once annoyed people and now felt precious. This was not forgiveness. It was reorientation. In archives and online forums, the case took on a second life, analyzed and dissected by strangers drawn to the neatness of a solved mystery. Timelines were built. Theories were tested retroactively. Some people argued about details that no longer mattered. Others treated it like a puzzle finally completed. The town mostly ignored this after a while. For them, the story was not entertainment. It was geography. It was weather. It was part of the local landscape now, unavoidable and formative. Every so often, a journalist would call, hoping for a fresh angle, a new quote. Most requests were declined politely. There was nothing new to add. The truth had arrived late, and it had arrived incomplete, and that was all there was. The rest belonged to those who had lived it. On certain nights, when the sky pressed low and the roads hummed with distant traffic, people still felt the echo of that first shock from 1999, the moment when normality cracked and never fully resealed. They remembered the missing posters, the rumors, the way suspicion drifted without direction, touching everyone lightly and no one decisively. They remembered how long it took for certainty to arrive and how strange certainty felt when it finally did. Cold cases are often described as sleeping, but this one had never slept. It waited. It waited in boxes and blood samples and the unglamorous patience of records clerks who refused to discard anything. It waited in technology that did not yet exist. It waited in the idea that someday someone would look again. That waiting was not passive. It was tense, unresolved, charged with the possibility that truth does not expire just because time passes. The final lesson of the case did not come from the arrest or the sentencing, but from what followed, from the realization that answers, once delivered, demand responsibility. They require communities to reflect, to ask what they missed, what they assumed, what they allowed familiarity to hide. They require individuals to accept that evil does not always announce itself loudly, and that vigilance is not paranoia, but care. As the years continue their quiet advance, the phrase Texas 1999 cold case solved began to feel less like a headline and more like a marker, a signpost along a longer road. Solved did not mean finished. It meant understood enough to stop asking certain questions and start living with others. It meant the mystery had ended, but the impact had not. In the end, the story settled into something less sensational and more enduring, a reminder that time can obscure, but it can also reveal, that silence can protect guilt, but persistence can dismantle it, and that even after decades, truth retains its ability to disrupt, to shock, to force reckoning. The studio lights fade in the narration, but the echo remains, because somewhere in that Texas town, a street still looks ordinary, a house still catches the sun, and a name once lost to uncertainty is spoken with clarity again. The cold case is no longer cold, but the chill it left behind lingers, a final, quiet testament to the cost of waiting and the weight of finally knowing. Time did what it always does after the noise fades. It moved forward without asking permission, carrying the town with it, smoothing some edges while sharpening others. The case slipped out of daily conversation, but it never truly left. It settled instead into the collective reflexes, into the way people locked doors, into the way neighbors watched one another with a politeness that now included distance. The story had taught them something permanent, and permanent lessons do not announce themselves loudly once learned. Years later, newcomers arrived unaware of the full weight of the place. They saw a quiet Texas town with tidy yards and predictable evenings. They commented on how friendly people seemed, how safe it felt. Longtime residents smiled at that, not unkindly, but with a knowledge that safety is not a feeling. It is an agreement, fragile and constantly renegotiated. They did not rush to correct the impression. Some truths are absorbed slowly, through tone rather than explanation. The victim's name appeared occasionally in local records, in scholarship funds, in a small plaque near a community center, understated and deliberate. No dates were emphasized. No details were carved. Just a name, a reminder that she had existed beyond headlines and forensic reports. Children asked questions when they noticed it. Adults answered carefully, choosing words that honored without terrifying, that explained without reopening wounds. The balance was never perfect. In the broader world, technology continued to evolve, and other cold cases found answers, each one briefly celebrated, each one carrying its own private aftermath. Investigators watched these developments with a mix of hope and restraint. They knew better now than to promise justice on a schedule. They knew that some truths would remain buried, not because they were unsolvable, but because no one would ever look again. That knowledge weighed heavier than any solved case ever could. The neighbor's name faded further into obscurity, surfacing only in legal documents, and the occasional online debate that tried to assign meaning where none could fully exist. Speculation about motive never settled into consensus. Some insisted on explanations rooted in psychology. Others searched for inciting moments, missed signals, turning points that could make the violence feel logical. The case resisted that impulse. It offered facts, not comfort. For those who had lived through the long years of not knowing, the absence of mystery did not mean the absence of pain. It meant the pain had a shape now, a boundary. It could be carried rather than chased. That distinction mattered. It allowed lives to expand again, cautiously, unevenly, but honestly. On anniversaries, a few people still gathered quietly, not for cameras, not for statements, but for shared silence. They stood together, listened to the wind, remembered the version of themselves who had once scanned the horizon for answers. They did not miss that waiting. They did not romanticize it. They acknowledged it, then let it pass. The case entered textbooks and seminars, stripped down to process and outcome, its human cost reduced to paragraphs. That reduction was necessary for teaching, but it always felt incomplete. Those who knew the story in its full dimension understood what was lost in translation, the nights of doubt, the corrosive suspicion, the way uncertainty rearranges a community's sense of itself. Even so, there was value in the telling. Each retelling, however clinical, pushed against the idea that time erases responsibility. It reinforced the notion that persistence is not dramatic but cumulative, built from small decisions not to discard, not to forget, not to declare something finished simply because it has grown old. Somewhere in storage, evidence from the case remained preserved, no longer active but not discarded, a quiet acknowledgement that history deserves respect even when it no longer demands action. It sat among countless other boxes, each one a reminder of questions asked and answered, or asked and abandoned. And in moments of reflection, when the town seemed especially still, people recognized a subtle shift that had taken years to articulate. The case had not only changed how they saw danger. It had changed how they valued attention, how they listened, how seriously they took the ordinary. They had learned that normal is not proof of harmlessness, and familiarity is not protection. The story, once defined by shock and uncertainty, settled into something heavier and more instructive. Not a warning shouted, but one spoken steadily, carried forward through memory rather than fear. It did not demand to be revisited. It simply remained available, ready to remind anyone who cared to look closely. Because even after a cold case is solved, even after arrests and sentences and headlines, what lingers most is not the crime itself, but the understanding it leaves behind. An understanding that time can delay truth, but it cannot cancel it. That silence can last decades, but it is never final. And so the town moved on, not away from the story, but with it, carrying its weight quietly, knowing now that some answers arrive late, some lessons arrive slowly, and some echoes never fully fade, no matter how clearly the truth is finally spoken. In the end, what remained was not the noise of sirens or the crackle of breaking news, but a quieter residue, a low hum that settled into the bones of the place. The town no longer flinched at the mention of the case, but it never heard it casually either. The words still carried weight. Cold case. 1999 solved. Each term sounded definitive on its own, yet together they formed something unfinished, a phrase that acknowledged resolution without promising peace. Life continued in visible ways. Stores opened and closed. Streets were repaved. Children who had not yet been born when the disappearance happened learned to drive past the house without knowing why their parents glanced at it a second longer than necessary. History layered itself over the past, but it never erased it. It simply learned to live on top of it, like sediment settling after a long disturbance. Those closest to the story understood that justice, when delayed, arrives altered. It does not heal in the way people imagine. It does not restore balance or rewind damage. It names what happened. It draws a line, and then it leaves the rest to human endurance. That truth became clearer with time, as the emotional adrenaline faded and only the facts remained, solid and immovable. The woman at the center of it all was remembered less as a victim and more as a presence. Stories about her shifted tone, becoming warmer, less careful. People allowed themselves to remember her impatience, her humor, contradictions. She became human again, not an emblem of loss, but a person who had lived fully until she did not. That reclamation mattered more than any verdict. The town learned to tell the story without leaning on fear. It learned to say, "This happened here, and we survived knowing it." That survival was not dramatic. It was incremental. It happened in ordinary choices, to look closer, to ask questions, to resist the comfort of easy assumptions. Those choices did not make headlines. They did not need to. Some nights, the past still pressed close. When summer heat lingered after dark, when the air felt heavy and sound carried strangely, people remembered how quickly certainty can collapse. They remembered that the crime did not arrive with warning music or ominous signs. It arrived quietly, folded into routine, disguised as normal. That memory stayed sharp, not to frighten, but to focus. The case became part of the town's internal language, a reference point for seriousness, for attention, for why certain instincts should not be ignored. New problems were measured against it, not in severity, but in significance. It had taught them that ignoring discomfort has a cost, and that familiarity should never be mistaken for safety. Elsewhere, other cold cases waited. Boxes remained unopened. Names lingered in databases without matches. The Texas case stood as proof that time does not always win, but it also stood as a reminder that not every story receives an ending. That knowledge stripped the triumph from the solve and replaced it with humility. One answer did not solve them all. It only proved that answers are possible. And so the narration ends not with certainty, but with awareness. Awareness that the past is never truly past. Awareness that truth can hide for decades without weakening. Awareness that communities are shaped as much by what they endure as by what they overcome. The final echo of the case is not the sound of a gavel or the flash of a camera, but the stillness that followed, the collective exhale after years of holding breath, and the understanding that even solved mysteries leave marks. The cold case is closed, the files complete, the headlines archived, but the imprint remains etched into memory, into habit, into the quiet vigilance of people who know now what waiting can cost. And somewhere in that Texas town, on an ordinary street under an ordinary sky, life continues with a slightly altered rhythm, one shaped by the knowledge that silence can be deceptive, that truth can be patient, and that even after decades, the past can still reach forward, demanding to be seen. What follows after everything has been said is not silence, but a different kind of listening. The town learned it slowly, the way you learn a new sound at night and eventually stop mistaking it for danger. Listening for what doesn't announce itself. Listening for the ordinary moments where the past brushes up against the present without warning. A look held too long. The door closed a little harder than necessary. A question that never quite gets asked. The case taught them that attention is a muscle. When it goes unused, it weakens. When it is exercised, it aches. People became more deliberate in small ways, not dramatic enough to notice from the outside. They checked in on one another more often. They trusted instincts they once dismissed as overthinking. They learned that discomfort is information, not inconvenience. Years blurred the sharp edges of the story, but they did not erase its outline. It remained recognizable, a shape everyone could trace even without naming it. The town's relationship with memory matured. It no longer demanded answers from the past every day. It simply carried what had been learned, like a scar that no longer hurts but still guides movement. Those who had once been children, when it all began, grew into adults with an inherited awareness. They didn't remember the headlines, but they remembered the tone of their parents' voices, the way routines subtly shifted, the unspoken rule that some things deserved caution even when they appeared harmless. The lessons survived transmission, not through fear, but through posture. In moments of reflection, people understood that the most unsettling truth was not that the crime had gone unnoticed for so long, but that it could have continued to do so indefinitely. That it was persistence, not inevitability, that changed the ending. That realization stripped away any illusion of guarantees. It replaced them with responsibility. The case did not make the town paranoid. It made it precise. It sharpened the collective sense of presence. It encouraged the habit of looking twice, of asking again, of refusing to let familiarity stand in for understanding. These were not dramatic changes. They were quiet corrections, made over time, almost invisible, but durable. Some nights, when the town lay still and the distance between houses felt wider than usual, the memory of waiting returned, not as pain, but as contrast. A reminder of what uncertainty feels like, and why clarity, even when it arrives late, matters. People did not wish for the mystery back. They did not miss the not knowing. They respected what it had taken to move beyond it. Elsewhere, the world continued to produce new stories, new shocks, new unresolved questions. The Texas case receded further into the archive, its lessons folded into the broader understanding of how truth behaves. Not loudly, not quickly, but relentlessly when given the chance. And so the narrative finally loosens its grip, not because it has nothing left to say, but because it has said enough to be carried forward without words. The cold case no longer demands attention. It has become part of the ground the town stands on, shaping steps without dictating direction. What endures is not the crime, nor even its solution, but the awareness left behind. That silence is not absence, that time is not permission, and that looking again can change everything. The story does not conclude with certainty or comfort. It settles instead into vigilance, into memory, into the steady understanding that some truths wait patiently, and when they surface, they ask not for spectacle, but for care.